Hey guys, Poro here, and I'm back with another Worlds 2023 video. This time I want to go over all of the players in each role and rank them all from what I think is the best to the worst. Keep in mind that these rankings are purely my opinion. I am not going to have the ultimate wisdom, but I do want to try my best to give some opinions on what I think the player rankings are because there were a lot of comments that were asking for it. So let's start out with top lane here. I'm gonna start with S tier and move down to F tier. So in the S tier, I have three top laners. I have Keen, Bin, and 369. Left to right does matter, so I think Keen is the best top laner at the tournament, then Bin, then 369. So the deal with these three is that you have Bin, who's an extremely amazing hyper carry top laner, then you have 369, who is the king of weak side, and then you have Keen, who's kind of like a mix of in-between. Imagine that you have three different power graphs, and then you have categories that say carry and utility, and then you give point values. So let's say Bin is like a 5 in carry and a 3 in utility, whereas 369 would be a 3 in carry and a 5 in utility, and then you have Keen, who's like around 4 each. The reason why I put Keen above is because I kind of value that all-around versatility. Like when you're playing with Bin, you get the Fioras, the Gangplanks, the Gwens, you get those super hard carry side laners who are just going to 1v9 the game, whereas when you get 369, you get Ornn, Scion, Gragas. You know he's going to go even or win every single lane, and you know that when it gets to team fights, he's going to pull his weight in team fights. And if somebody were to put 369 over Bin, or even both of them above Keen, I would not have any complaints about it. I just personally really like how Keen plays. If you want utility from the guy, he can play Gragas, he can play Malphite. You know, if you need carries, he can play Gwen. He's got a Rise top. He's a guy who's always going to pull out creative picks if the team needs it. He has a history of playing champions like Vladimir, Kayle. You know, back in 2018, when it was him and Khan were kind of the two carry top laners, Keen played a lot of Jace, and he doesn't really play that this season because Jace has been mostly going mid lane, but he can pull out all of these picks. He can pick pretty much anything you need him to, and I just think that that's extremely valuable to a team. So I have him first, then I have Bin second because I believe he has a higher ceiling than 369. I think if you're looking for a top laner to be amazing every single game, you go with 369, but I think that Bin has the ability to carry games that 369 doesn't, and me personally, I value that a little bit higher. Not that much. Again, I could see those three going in any order, and I think it would be justified. Next to my A tier, I have four top laners. I have Zika, Doran, Zeus, and Broken Blade. So the first one is Zika. I have him in fourth. Heading into spring of 2023, I was not very high on this guy. I would have told you he was middle of the pack, LPL top laner. You know, he can play some things, he's not that great, but he really stepped it up in both spring and summer, especially when Jax came into the meta. The first champion I think of when I think of Zika is Jax. I remember a few games of his Jax where he was just like extremely solo carrying and winning lane and doing well on side lane and stuff, so I definitely have a lot more respect for him now as a player than I did before. I still don't think he's on the same level as Bin in 369 in the LPL. I feel like there's a very clear gap between those two and all of the other top laners. So I have him in A, but definitely very respectable, more than I gave him credit for. Doran is here because he had a massive improvement this split. Before, he was always kind of seen as the weak link of Genji, but I think this summer split, he's definitely been stepping it up, so I'm gonna give him the respect there. Zeus is one of those guys who, on a different day of the week, in a different timeline, he's S tier, but the issue is that every single time he plays against Doran, he just cannot figure things out. And then also there was the entire stint where Faker was not on T1 and Poby was subbed in, and almost every single member of T1 looked completely dysfunctional while Faker was out, Zeus included. Of course, once Faker came back, Zeus started smurfing again, but there was that period of time where Faker wasn't there, and then all of the other players kind of have question marks surrounding how good they are, so I don't really feel comfortable putting him in S or super high in A. And then the last one I've got is Broken Blade. Broken Blade is an interesting case. I think that he has a super high ceiling. I think that when you get in mid to late game, he's a very good player. I mean, look no further than his MSI performance on Darius, where he just straight up made the game-winning play on Darius. He has a lot of room to improve also. I think that we're just seeing the start of him. When he was on Schalke, it was better than when he was on TSM. And then when he moved to G2, now he looks even better than he did on Schalke, even though he was clearly the best player on that team as well. Now moving into B tier, the Shy, Kana, Summit, Oscarinen, and Rest. And just for clarification, if Wonder was playing, Wonder would be here as well. So the Shy is pretty simple. I think the guy is still amazing in lane. Every single LPL top laner still says that he's a monster to play against in lane, even if we can't necessarily see it. because the other half of the time he's straight up running it down. So you kind of get a mixed bag with the Shy, where people still view him as this insane laning threat and everybody has respect for him, but then in the actual live games, you'll see a lot of times he'll just kind of die in lane for fun, or he'll be super overextended and he'll die to ganks. So it just depends on what kind of mood the Shy is in when he's playing. And then also lately, and this was not a thing in 2018 and 2019, there are top laners who can just outlane the Shy. Like, I think that when 369 or Bin go against the Shy, they just win, which wasn't a thing before, but now it is. So I have the Shy at the top of B tier because I know how good he can be. When he's on a good day, he's probably top of A tier. But when he feels like inting and Weiwei is not anywhere near his lane, he's probably in C tier. Kana's another one where he's a super talented player, but a lot of people think that Kana was the issue on D plus Kia. I don't necessarily think he was 100% the issue, but I definitely get where people would come to that conclusion because, you know, you have a team with Canyon, Showmaker, Deft, and those are three of the most accomplished players of all time in their respective roles. And then you have Kellen, who maybe was not doing so hot at the beginning, got replaced with Bible, but then when he came back, he was giga smurfing. So, you know, if DK isn't top 3, then, well, what's the last role that you can pin the blame on? And, well, it's Kana. But I don't actually think that Kana is that bad. Like, he had a Rumble game where he looked really, really strong. He's also just a young player. I think he has a lot of room to grow. I think that every international competition he comes to will just level him up as a player is what I'm hoping. But I just don't, he's definitely not at the same level as those other top LCK top laners. In fact, I would make an argument that if you put Kana on a 9th or 10th place LCK team, people would probably tell you that Kana's a 9th or 10th place LCK top laner. I think that he's one of those players where he doesn't really have that much influence over what his team's doing, so he'll just look as good as however good his team is. Summit I have up here kind of because, I mean, it's a little bit of, if you only saw what he did this split in LCS, you would probably put him in C, but I just know too much about the guy and I've seen him play in other regions. When he was in LCK on Live Sandbox, he was just straight up the second best top laner in the region. When he went to LPL on FPX, he was gapping a whole lot of LPL top laners. Summit is one of those guys who will just win lane. He is a lane dominant player. He will go up 20 CS, he'll solo kill you, but the problem is that he just doesn't really seem to be on the same page as his team a lot. Like, he'll die on side lane a lot. He likes to chain in sometimes. He's had a few extremely suspicious plays, but I still have him in B because I think that his ceiling is really high and I think that winning lane is valuable. I don't think Summit will have a problem against any of the top laners at this tournament 1v1 isolated. I think you could put Summit against Bin, and if there was no jungle attention and the matchup was an even matchup, I think Summit would be fine. Oscarinen's also another really interesting one because when he came into Fnatic for the first week, he was just straight up running it down. I think he was like 0 kills, 18 deaths or something like that. Then in the second week, he looked okay, and then in the third week, he was gapping everybody. I think Oscarinen is another one of those players where he's young, he had nerves going in, but in reality, he's actually just this insane potential player. Kind of similar to Yike in that respect, except that Yike has the pieces around him to help him facilitate his growth faster, but I think those two players are very similar, where you could see Oscarinen completely choke and lose out to a lot of the C-tier top laners, but then you could also see him step up and then just randomly beat Doran in lane or something. And then Rest I've got up here because Rest is just a really good top laner. I mean, he's been top 1 or top 2 top laners in PCS for years now. It's either been him versus Hanabi or more recently him versus Solo Kill, but he's always been in that conversation for arguably the best PCS top laner. So out of pure respect, I have him. Like, I imagine if he was imported into LCS, I think he would easily be a top half top laner. Could maybe even push for, you know, 1 or 2. In C tier, I've got a whole bunch of names, so I'll just blitz through them all real quick. Licorice I have at top of C because his MSI performance was fantastic, and his summer split performance was pretty good, but his spring split performance was terrible, so I just still don't really have the faith that he can be consistently at the level that he is. But if he plays the same way that he did at MSI, he is for sure middle of the pack or top of the pack B tier top laner. Chasey is a player who's really inconsistent. His ceiling is super high. He had some really impressive rookie games, but a lot of people also have been pointing out that he has a tendency to just die for fun sometimes and lose the game. Fudge is a player that I wish I could put in B, but sadly, this split just has not looked as good. Fudge at MSI 2021, he was just straight up the best top laner at MSI 2021. I think that anybody who watched that tournament would agree, but he just has not really kept that same level. Adam is a player who I think is better than most people give him credit for. I feel like on this list, most people would have Adam at bottom of C or in D, but I think Adam is actually very valuable. A lot of people don't like it because what he does in game is visually not very appealing, but I do think he brings an impact, like a positive impact, to most games that he plays, one way or the other, whether he's playing Darius Olaf and winning lane, or whether he's playing Scion and sacking everything for mid and bot pressure. At least he's doing something, and I think that most of the time it is pretty interesting and it does end up working out. That being said, there are times when it doesn't work out, and on those occasions, he just loses the game. So Robo is kind of like the South American version of Adam, where he's either piss stomping, obliterating everybody, or he's running it down. Those are the only two modes he has. Either he's on a carry and he's destroying some of the best top laners in the world, like he did at Worlds 2022, or he sucks ass and is losing to a player that probably wouldn't even make LCS Academy. Personally, Robo's my favorite player at this entire tournament. I love watching him play. He's super entertaining. If he does anything positive for his team, he'll stand up and start shouting and cheering and all of that stuff. I just love his energy. And I love not knowing whether he will be the sole reason why their team wins or the sole reason why the team loses. Dokla is a player who I think his ceiling is a lot higher than what he's shown. I've seen what he was able to do in Champions Queue back when that wasn't dead, and I've also seen flashes of it in some of his games, but he's not exactly super consistent, and he's not able to consistently dominate the top laners in LCS either, so I have him in C, but I could definitely see him pulling out some big performances in Worlds this year. Ozzy, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, in fact I'm pretty sure I'm not, but Ozzy is kind of your run-of-the-mill, plays regular utility tanks and goes even in lane or falls slightly behind, and then is decently useful in teamfights. He's the guy who will play Casanti, Ornn, Scion. He doesn't have a very explosive playstyle. He's a known quantity. When you get him on your team, you know what you're getting. You're going to get that decently consistent laner who will contribute to teamfights, but you're not going to get any extreme top gaps. I have him in C because I think being consistent and being solid at tanks is valuable, but he's definitely not going to be good enough to outlane any of the laners in B tier. And then you have Bong, who's kind of the opposite. Bong has a champion ocean. He kind of just plays whatever the hell he wants to play, and maybe he wins and maybe he loses. I think that Bong had a good showing at MSI. I definitely think he got destroyed by Bin, but he also solo killed Bin, so you know, you win some, you lose some. But Bong definitely showed me that he's a solid top laner who can make things work. By the way, I apologize. I say definitely way too much. If you ever see me write my scripts, there's like 20 definitelys in the script, and I end up needing to control F the word and then cut out 75% of them. In D tier, I've only got two top laners, Kiaya and Udapon. Mainly Kiaya is here because I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with Kiaya. I just think he's not at the same level as the other top laners. I think that was made extremely clear at MSI this year, that a lot of GAMS players who attended MSI, at least, some of those aren't on the roster anymore, just were not up to the standard. I mean, they lost to Rainbow 7, so they were kind of exposed a little bit. VCS really didn't play in very many international tournaments due to COVID. They only had a showing in Worlds 2022 and MSI 2023, so there's not much to go off of. I haven't seen any proof that Kiaya can hold his own against major region top laners. Then Udapon I also have in D because, I mean, the guy played ADC for 5 years. He did play top lane back in 2015, 2017, but it's been decently removed. Now, in finals, Udapon did have some pretty good plays, his Scion games in particular, but if you play ADC for 5 years, your top lane ceiling can only be so high, you know what I'm saying? And it's not like Udapon was necessarily dominating the international scene either when he was in his main role. He's always been good domestically, but then he gets to internationals and he looks either mediocre or subpar, so I don't really have faith that he'll be able to show off in top lane at all. I think there's a chance that he'll be able to hang in there with some of the other C-tier top laners, mainly because he only plays utility champions. He only plays tanks, as far as I can see. so you're not getting anything special with him, so I don't necessarily think he's going to run it down or anything. And in F tier, speaking of running it down, I put Sparta. In VCS Finals, Sparta was very clearly being gapped by Kiaya the entire time, getting solo killed here and there. There was a couple of plays where Kiaya was being like 3-man to top lane, and the kill was guaranteed, and then Sparta would find a way to still get in there and die somehow. There's one play that's in my head vividly where Kiaya was playing Casanti, and he was dead. Like, he was guaranteed dead, and then Sparta decided, oh, you know what, I'll start walking back towards him while I have no health, and then Kiaya was able to flash Q and kill him before he died. And you know, those are just those kinds of plays where I watch them, and I'm like, why are you doing that? And it's not like the Shy kind of why are you doing that, where the Shy will also win lane half the time, because I don't think Sparta can win lane against any of these top laners, so that's why I have him in F. Alright, let's move on to jungle. This one, I'm going to try to make it a little bit faster. I did not realize how long I rambled with top lane. Anyway, this time I have no F tier players. I don't think that there are any junglers who are actually directly negatively influencing their team in the majority of games. As the sole S tier, I have Kanavi. He's been the best jungler in LPL, and LPL was very dominant over LCK at MSI, so I'm going to give Kanavi benefit of the doubt and just say he's probably the best jungler in the world right now. At the top of A tier, I have Canyon, and that's a little bit of a controversial placement, because again, it's one of those things where if you've only watched this split, you wouldn't know why I have Canyon that high. But I also know that on a good day, Canyon's ceiling is significantly higher than Kanavi's. If Canyon's on fire, he's the best jungler in the world, like peak jungler of all time. He hasn't been nearly as consistent this season. I think a lot of it is the meta. A lot of the meta has been those dog junglers, you know, Sejuani, Vi, Maokai. You know, those aren't his champions. Canyon's champions are Nidalee, Graves. If he can get his hands on Kayn, he's a Kayn player, you know, he likes to play dynamic junglers, so if we get to see any of those at Worlds, he'll do really well, but if he's just stuck on utility the entire time, maybe not. Then after that, I've got Shun. Shun is here mainly just because he's not Kanavi. I think that it was very clear that every single time Shun and Kanavi played up against each other, that Kanavi was the superior jungler. However, Shun really has made a name for himself as one of the strongest junglers in the LPL this year. I think that MSI just lit a spark in him and he realized, like, hey, you know, I can destroy all these people, and then he has been. Jacob here is another controversial placement, but me personally, I think the guy's crazy good. I think he's definitely rough around the edges a little bit when you watch him play. You can see that he makes rookie mistakes, can be overconfident, can be not with the team. But when he's on fire, he is the best Western jungler in the world right now. At MSI, he was piss-gapping Peanut, for lack of a better term. If you watch those 4 games, Yike was destroying Peanut in early pathing in ways that I've like never seen before. Same thing with Shun. He wasn't piss-gapping Shun, but he was out-pathing Shun early, and I think it is very impressive to be able to outpath 2 of the most accomplished Eastern junglers at MSI, period. So I definitely think that Yike has what it takes to be the big deciding factor over whether G2 can beat the Eastern teams. That's why I said in my MSI, or not MSI, in my Worlds 2023 video that the player to watch is Yike, because I think that if Yike can tap into his ceiling, G2 could make a very deep run at Worlds this year. Ignoring the fact that both my shirt color and the brightness in the background changed, let's move to Tarzan next. Tarzan is a very good jungler. He's had years in the past where he looked really strong. Take, for example, 2021 summer, where he was really the driving force behind LNG looking as strong as they did, to the point where I thought that they were going to be a top contender for winning that world championship. Obviously they didn't do that, but this year Tarzan has been definitely more standard, having a lot of generic picks, not very explosive playstyle, but I still think he's a very strong jungler, so I'd keep him in A. Owner is another one of those junglers who was always previously, you know, low S, high S to high A kind of player, but again, ever since Faker left T1 for that stint in 2023 summer, one could say that a lot of the different players were exposed in a sense, and so again, I just don't have as much faith in Owner as an individual player. I do think that this meta will favor him because of the inevitable Worlds Lee Sin buffs, and we all know Owner is one of the best Lee Sins out there, so I'm excited to see if he'll be able to pull that out. But apart from that, I don't expect him to be explosive or to be the best jungler coming out of Korea or anything. Then finally we have Weiwei, who I actually think is a little bit underrated. He didn't have a team in spring for God knows whatever reason, because Weiwei was for sure, when he was on BLG back in the day, a top 5 jungler in the LPL, and then he had a bad split and then was immediately sidelined and picked up by nobody. So definitely a good change that he was able to come in and replace Karsa. Kind of a shame because I do like Karsa, but Weiwei definitely works with the Shy pretty well. When Weiwei is able to apply pressure to the Shy's lane, Weibo Gaming look a lot stronger. Take the first game of the split that Weiwei played, for example, where he whipped out the Vi and had a fantastic performance on that champion. It can be really difficult for pro players to look good on Vi because a lot of times they'll be dying, 6 to 10 times in a game. But Weiwei came out and showed that the champion can just straight up carry a game with very minimal deaths. I would not be surprised if Weiwei ends up leaving this tournament a lot more on people's radars than they expected. Starting at top of B tier, here's where I have Peanut. Peanut's one of those junglers where you put him on your team and he will get the job done. He'll be pretty stable. The main reason why I don't have him in A or S is because I feel like whenever he goes up against clearly superior junglers, you can tell through early pathing that he is being significantly gapped. Take Genji's series versus G2 as an example, where Yike was absolutely running circles around Peanut for all of those games. I think that Peanut's best days are definitely behind him. I think that he is a decent jungler who will be able to have a solid impact in most games. I just don't think he has that same ceiling anymore to be able to push into that A tier. Cuz on the flip side does have a little bit of a higher ceiling than Peanut in my opinion, but he also has a tendency to just lose the game for fun occasionally. So that kind of volatility keeps him out of that A tier territory for me, similar to how I have the Shy in B tier for top laners. This is also where I'm putting Junjia. I think Junjia is super strong as a jungler. Everybody will be boot camping in Korea, hopefully, for this World Championship. And if things go the same this time as they have in prior years, Junjia is probably going to be sitting at the top of solo queue among pro players, if not just being the top overall. He's crazy at solo queue. But even above that, he's shown on EDG that he has what it takes to perform with the best teams in the world. There were times when JJ was underperforming and Junjia stepped in and he made the team look better for those games. I think just because of the fact that he's in PCS on PSG now, a lot of people are going to underrate him. But I still think Junjia, if you put him in LEC or LCS, he's a top level jungler. I think if you put him in LPL or LCK, he's a mid-level jungler, so there is no chance that I could ever put him below B just because he's in a minor region. Similar to that, here's where you'll notice that I have a handful of the strong Western junglers, Razork, River, Elyoya, Blabber. Most of these I have here because I view them all as very strong junglers with different amounts of upsides. Razork, I really like his unique champion pool, his willingness to play champs like Karthus, for example, he whipped out a lot. Talia, those are the types of champions that you need in order to find counters for what teams that are better than you will bring out. River, I just think, is an all-around solid jungler. You put him on any champion, he'll have an impact early game. Mainly the only reason why I have him behind Junjia and in that spot is because I know for a fact that if River was still in PCS, that there is a very, very good chance that he would not be as good as Junjia. And also similarly, if you put River into the LPL at all, I think he would get booted out pretty quickly. Elyoya is one of those junglers where you always have to give him respect because he can and will, if the opportunity presents itself, lock in a carry jungler and carry the entire game. Same kind of deal with Blabber. They both play in the same fashion where they can play those utility supportive junglers and they can help win team fights and help play for their lanes and whatnot. But if the opportunity arises for Elyoya to pick Bel'Veth or for Blabber to pick Olaf, they will run over the entire game, even against teams that are better than them. So those are definitely two junglers that you have to look out for and be scared of. Moving into the C tier, first up I have Sheo. Sheo is super iffy for me. I'm not exactly sure where to put this guy exactly, because if you look at some of his Wukong games from earlier in the split, he looks like a god, but then you put him on some other those champions that he played in the summer split, and all of a sudden he seems more of middle of the pack LEC kind of level. Middle of the pack LEC just isn't going to cut it on an international level, but I do think that if he can play the same way that he did specifically in spring, then he could have something to say and definitely out-jungle some of those B-tier junglers up there. Levi is one that you always have to look out for. He has a very, very deep jungle pool. He's one of those junglers who's willing to push his pick to 4 and 5, and then get counterpicked because he plays a lot of champions that you won't see other junglers play. Nocturne and Karthus, two that he's very famous for. My main issue with Levi is in Worlds 2022 and MSI 2023, Gam had a little bit of a depressing showing, to say the least. And Levi being the team captain for those teams, I have a lot of respect for the guy. I think he's a strong jungler, but at some point you just have to be realistic, and when a lot of those team comps are being built around Levi, if they're not winning, then somebody has to be the problem. Piosik is a player who has been memed on a lot. A lot of people are saying that he's the worst player to ever win a world championship, which, in my opinion, not really true. I do think that he was not a top half jungler in LCK when he played there, but you also have to remember that this guy's career is honestly just starting. Like, yeah, he's 23, that's definitely not a young age or anything, but he played a few years on DRX, and then he moved to NA. That's been his entire career. I think he's still got room to grow. His Viego pentakill in LCS playoffs was super clean. There are definitely moments when he's playing where you're asking what the hell he's doing, but definitely nothing offensive enough to put him in D tier. Contracts is another one of those players where, similar to Zika, prior to the start of Spring Split, I had little to no faith in this guy, but he definitely did step it up a lot in summer. On an individual player basis, I do think that his prime is past him, and I don't think that we'll be seeing any insane, high ceiling, master mechanical plays coming out of the guy. But he's one of those junglers where you can trust in him to get the job done and be stable every game. Bean J, opposite of Contracts, is not somebody who you can trust to get the job done or be stable, but he has a massive ceiling that he displayed in Worlds 2022 on Saigon Buffalo. Unfortunately, he has not picked Pantheon this year, which is very, very sad to me because this guy is the Pantheon jungle player. But he's still got moments where he shines and you can tell that he's got a bright future ahead of him. A lot of people in VCS are complaining about how inconsistent he's been this year, and that's true, but I think if Team Wales wants to find success in play-ins, Bean J is going to be that one guy who has that potential to step it up and bring it to the next level. Maybe Artemis too, but we'll talk about him later. And then, of course, there are no F-tier junglers, but instead we have 4 D-tier junglers, and these are the junglers who kind of pick your utility champions and then do nothing. Croc, it has been the international weak spot for Loud for these last competitions. It's been very apparent that where you have players like Robo who can match or defeat some of the international top laners on a good day, or Tanones who can find plays, or Seos who just sometimes straight up looks better than the competition, that Croc is falling behind in that department. He's never really able to outpath or gap enemy junglers. He's not a carry player who's going to explode in a game. He's just going to pick your standard Vi, Maokai, Sejuani, maybe a spicy Amumu in there here and there, and he'll fulfill his role and play pretty much how you would expect any random jungler to play. Audi and Steel are similar examples of this. They have been in the scene for years and years. Whenever it comes to that big international stage, neither of them really have what it takes to stand up to the rest of the competition. Steel in particular, in that one year at MSI 2021 where DFM looked like they could go somewhere, when they were about to beat DK, it was Steel who kind of overreached and threw the entire game away. And then finally we have Gemini. This is not his first international competition either, and I expect it to be the relatively same thing as before, where he's just going to pick those regular utility champions and kind of be a silent piece of nothing who are not necessarily inting. None of these 4 players I think are going to be completely running it down, except for Croc that one time that he forgot his jungle item. Other than that, none of these guys are going to run it down, but none of them are going to stand out either. Getting into the mid laners, I think that in S tier, I have Scout and Knight, 2 best mid laners this year. No competition. A lot of people who saw MSI will have Knight at the top of their lists because Knight has finally had that breakout year that everybody in LPL has been hoping that he's been going to have for these last few years. He looks super strong. You put him on a champion like Ari, he'll be dropping 10 to 15 kills a game randomly for no reason. He's got a champion Ocean, can play pretty much every control mage in the book. And then you have Scout, who is quite literally playing the split, actually the year of his career in both spring and summer split. Spring split especially, Scout has been the undisputed best mid laner in LPL. I would say in summer he has a very strong argument to be put over Knight also, which is why I have Scout as number 1 on my mid list. Then in A tier, this is where I have the 6 other Eastern mid laners. This is the role to me that displays the largest gap between the East and the West. Korea is quite literally sending their big 4. They're sending Faker, Chovy, Showmaker, and BDD, the 4 mid laners who have been dominating for the last multiple years. If you're a mid laner in LCK and you want to make your name known at all, these are the 4 mid laners that are always seen as that final wall, that final obstacle that none of the other mid laners have been able to triumph over. There's certainly an argument to be made for all 4 of them, whether you're taking Faker for his leadership, Chovy for his laning, BDD for his overall consistency, or Showmaker for his super high ceiling. I could really see them in any order. I just have Showmaker in last because this summer split definitely has been one of his weaker splits. And then I've got Faker at the top, maybe a little bit out of bias, but I do think that it has to say something about how much he leads the team when he disappears, T1 goes on a massive losing streak, and then he comes back right before playoffs and they immediately make a run to finals. Also in there I've got Xiaohu and Yagao. Xiaohu has just been doing, normal Xiaohu things. He's going to be a top 5 LPL mid laner. No matter which split you look at, really, you could go all the way back to the mid-2010s and Xiaohu is still going to be a top 5 mid laner in LPL. This guy is just good and consistent and solid. Then you have Yagao, where I said this at MSI, I'll say it again. This player is underrated. Everybody seems to think Yagao sucks for some reason, as if summer 2022 LPL finals didn't exist where he completely gapped Knight off the face of the earth. This guy has it in him to play well. There are lots of games where he'll just run it down or be invisible, but he is a good mid laner, and against other Western mid laners, he will look better than them, is what I'm thinking. Then in B tier, this is where you have that upper echelon of LEC mid laner. First, I have Caps and Humanoid. This one really is just... Caps I can't put in A tier because these past couple of years from him, he has been on a downturn. Don't get me wrong, he stepped it up big time in LEC regional finals. But apart from that, we haven't had much from 2023 that will suggest that he'll be able to compete with the Western mid laners, especially at MSI where it felt like he was just a tier below. Humanoid, on the other hand, is a player who's proven internationally that he can match up against the Eastern mid laners, but the issue with him is that he is very inconsistent. There's this meme surrounding Humanoid that in regular season, he's really bad because he doesn't care at all, and then when you get him into an international competition, he just steps it up and becomes the best Western mid laner there is. But I'm not going to bank on him just having the same form as he's had in other world championships. It's hard to put him in A tier against the other Eastern mid laners when he hasn't shown that he can do it consistently in the LEC. Gory I've got here in B tier, mostly because we know from when he played in LCK that he can match up against those big 4 LCK mid laners. We've also seen him play in multiple other regions, and in the LCS he was for sure top 3 mid laner for the entirety of the year. River and Gory, in my opinion, make up the best mid jungle duo in LCS, and that's because they are both extremely competent players who can probably hold their own against any of the other mid jungles at this tournament. And then Niski, I think, has a little bit of that Yagao effect, where a lot of people think that Niski is significantly worse than he is, because they underestimate the amount of value that he provides to the team from a team play and communication perspective. This guy, historically, you put him in any team, and he just makes the team better. It doesn't matter what team it is, but you put him in there and they start getting results. He's also one of those players who's willing to play champions who will take lower resources in order to help his team out more in the long run, and I think having a player like that is really valuable. C tier is comprised of pretty much your top half LCS mid laners, plus the international mid laners that I think can hold their own if they were to be imported into either LEC or LCS. APA I have at the top of C because I've been a big fan of his for years now, and I knew that he's always had it in him to make a splash in LCS, and he finally got his chance. And as expected, he has been looking very strong for the entirety of Summer Split. Nuke, also a player who has made huge improvements this year. In past years, he would have been in that D tier category, but he looks a lot more solid this year, especially when you give him some of those more volatile champions like Akali. MNS is a player with a super high ceiling. When you put him on champions like LeBlanc and Yone, he can make a huge mechanical impact, but he can also go completely silent, or just run it down. Tenones is one of those minor region players who's been at the top of his region for a very long time, and I'm pretty confident that you could put him against most of the LCS teams and he would look pretty decent. Same deal with Maple, he's been at the top of PCS for a while. He's been on teams that have defeated some of the top LCK and LPL teams in the past. Actually, don't quote me on that. I don't know if Flash Wolves ever beat an LPL team. I know that they beat many LCK teams though. And then he went into LCS, and while people did say that he looked underwhelming on TSM, I also don't necessarily think he looked any worse than your average LCS mid laner either, so I feel comfortable keeping him in C. Palafox is a bit of a wild card. Mostly I have him in C because I'm not ready to put him in B tier yet due to how he played in past years. It is definitely a fact that this summer he stepped it up big time and could make arguments for being the best LCS mid laner heading into Worlds, and I wouldn't be opposed to it. You know, if somebody had him at the bottom of B tier, I would be happy with that. But for me, I just need a little bit more before I can take away the stigma of all of those years that he played prior. Arya is again a mid laner who has been to other international competitions and has proven that he can play against major region mid laners. In fact, he was impressive enough in MSI and Worlds that he had a short stint in the LCK where they brought him into the LCK, and then he, proved he couldn't keep up with LCK mid laners and was sent back to Japan. But at least they gave him a shot, which proves that there are other people who think that Arya is a pretty solid mid laner. And then last I've got Miru. I have him here mainly because in play-ins of MSI 2023, he matched up against the other mid laners in his group very well. He was for sure a key piece in how Rainbow Seven were able to defeat GAM, and he was the only player that didn't look severely gapped in their games against BLG. Then finally in D tier, I have some more mid laners who I just don't think are consistent enough or don't have enough impact to consistently be able to influence games. The first one there is Glory. Glory I have here because he's pretty inconsistent, and half the time I feel like he has no idea what his team is trying to do, but you can tell that this guy has mechanics. Especially there was this one solo kill on LeBlanc where it just felt like he knew the limits of his champion perfectly. So he shows flashes of mechanical brilliance, I just don't have faith that he'll be able to hold up against better teams. Jimmian is one of those invisible mid laners who won't do anything egregious in lane, but then you just get later into the game, and the guy's not inting, but then the game ends and you realize he did nothing to contribute to their win or loss. And then Katie, I have him here because at MSI, he pretty much ran it down, but also he's been at the top of VCS for a while, so he's clearly not an F tier mid laner. I just think that he can't hold his own against international mids, or at least he hasn't proven so yet. Next is ADC, and to the surprise of nobody, Ruler's at the top. I think he's made it pretty clear this year that he is by far the best ADC in the world. The only ADC who's even been able to hold a candle to him at points has been Gala in playoffs, but Gala of course does not have the same level of resume as Ruler had for the entire rest of the year apart from that, and Elk every single time he goes up against Ruler just kind of folds. Ruler's at the top. I also saw a poll recently that says that the majority of people essentially think that Ruler's not only the best ADC in the tournament, but the best player in the tournament. And I wouldn't really disagree. I think that the other argument you can make is maybe Kanavi or Scout, but other than that, that's really all you got for that. Then ADC, like mid lane, I also think is a very Eastern dominant role. Elk I have here because apart from when he's being gapped by Ruler, he's shown that he's been extremely dominant the entire year. At MSI, he proved to a lot of people that he is a top tier AD carry. And in summer, the entire BLG roster just kind of took off. They went 15-1 in regular season, and most of their wins came from either Bin or Elk carrying. Gumayusi I have this high because of the players on T1 when Faker left. Gumayusi was definitely the one who held up the best and still looked very strong in every single game. Sure, he doesn't play well in every game, but being able to stay functional and still being one of the best LCK ADCs when Faker was out proves to me at least that he deserves to be in that higher A tier. Pays, if you give him another few years, could be S tier, but I think that this year he's still showing a little bit of those green spots. When the pressure is on in LCK, at least he's been able to perform, but he had a bit of a lackluster MSI when he was going up against Elk and Ruler, so we have yet to see if he really has what it takes to carry in the clutch against the best teams in the world internationally. Gala here because, like I mentioned before, he was the only ADC who's been able to match up to Ruler, and that was in their 2 clashes in LPL playoffs. But apart from that, he just hasn't looked as impressive as Ruler for the rest of the summer and spring splits. Aiming and Light are both here because they're very similar players in the sense that they're 2 of those ADCs where you put them on your team and you're not going to get those same level of explosive 1v9 plays that you might get from, say, an Elk or a Jackie Love, but you're also not going to get any of the plays where your ADC is flashing forward in a teamfight and dying, or going for a solo kill in lane and throwing the entire game away, like Elk or Jackie Love. These 2 players are going to be very stable regardless of what team you put them in and what champion you put them on, and I think that's a very valuable trait to have in ADC. And then you have Deft, who of course is not looking nearly as impressive as he did in Worlds 2022, but still looks very strong and can still 1v9 some games. Unfortunately, the entire D plus Kia roster as a whole has been underachieving, we'll say. Then we move into the B tier, and first up I have Hansama, and for LEC fans, they might be a little bit surprised at that. I could definitely see people putting Hansama at the bottom of A tier, or even the middle of A tier. The issue is that I have also seen what he did in LCS, so it really depends on what kind of Hansama shows up to this tournament. Are we going to get the Hansama that played in 2021 Worlds and was by far the most dominant Western ADC? Or are we going to get the Hansama who was in TL and does nothing and just loses. So far on G2, I've said I'm gonna say that we've gotten somewhere in between, actually. I don't think that 2023 Hansama is better than 2021 Worlds Hansama yet. So sure, if we get peak Hans, then he's A tier. But what I'm expecting is that he'll be somewhere around where I put him in that front of B. Crowny I have up here, mainly because I think that one, he's one of the best team fighting ADCs that the West has, and two, because in pretty much all of BDS's wins, Crowny's the one who's holding it together and getting the team across the finish line. Of course, there are a lot of memes like Crowny's Comet, but when push comes to shove, this guy's been consistent for years, he has a really big champion pool, and he has really good positioning in team fights, and I think that all of those are enough to let him keep up. And next I've got Berserker, who we know can be extremely good and is extremely good, but hasn't necessarily found the same ceilings this year as he did last year. I still think he's the best ADC in the LCS by a wide margin, but he's got a lot to prove before I'm going to put him in with those other Eastern bot laners. Then I've got Carzzy, who's a really big coin flipper, but he has shown that he could be a very strong carry. This guy's got a really impressive Ezreal, for example. When you put him on that champion, he can really push Ezreal to the full capabilities. Similar to when I watched Deft play Ezreal almost. I'm not saying that Carzzy's Ezreal is anywhere near the level of Deft's Ezreal. I'm just saying that they both play with extreme hyper-aggression on that champion, and it looks really fun to watch when they're on form. Carzzy has also gotten a lot of flack for not being consistent over the years, but I think that this guy has the results and has looked actually like pretty decent with Hylissang so far, so I have faith that overall he'll make a strong showing. And then last, we've got Noah, who is young and has a lot of potential and has had games where he looks really, really good, and then he also has games where he feels completely invisible, so we'll have to see what kind of Noah we get. Moving into C tier, we're starting to see those 80 carries who, when they get gold, they're able to pop off and carry their team, but they aren't necessarily going to be destroying other ADCs in lane or anything. FBI has been consistently at the top of the LCS for ADC for years now. I think he's solid. I'm not as high on FBI as a lot of other people are, but I do think he's a very stable ADC for the most part. Wako I have here mainly because of his MSI performance. He did really well at MSI in my opinion. Whenever he got Aphelios, it felt like PSG had the ability to win whatever games they were playing. Same thing with Rout. This is a bit of an unpopular opinion, I believe, but I do think that Rout is an upgrade to Brance. I think that Rout has a lot deeper of a champion pool, and that he's also better in those mid to late game team fights. Brance, of course, is more energetic in lane and can make bigger plays happen early, but at the end of the day, I think that Rout is good, and I think that he showed it at MSI. Artemis here is kind of the other X factor for Team Wales. I'm not quite sure whether Team Wales is a bottom tier team, or whether they have what it takes to slip into maybe a conversation for getting out of play-ins. But if they are going to get out of play-ins, it's going to come from Beanjay and it's going to come from Artemis. Artemis has shown that he's had a high ceiling. He's looked very dominant in VCS the entire year. I think that part of that just has to do with the fact that, for the most part, the other people he's playing with are people who have consistently been at the top of VCS and can consistently beat down a lot of the other mid or lower tier players in their roles. It's definitely a lot easier to play ADC when you have a good team behind you. So I really don't know if Artemis has what it takes to stand out in international competitions against better teams, but he's for sure a good ADC who's shown signs of brilliance in those mid-late game team fights. Stixay, another one of those players who really surprised me. Earlier in spring, if I had seen this list, I probably would have put Stixay in D tier, but he stepped it up big time. At MSI, he looked good. For all of summer, he's looked good. He's had a few performances on champions like Zeri, where he can make game-winning, super impressive plays. I still don't think Stixay has the same ceiling as any of the players in B tier, which is why I have him here, but he's better than I thought he'd be. And then Shun is kind of in a situation similar to Artemis. I don't think Shun's ceiling is all that high, but he's one of those players who very consistently throughout the years has been able to stand at the top of PCS in the ADC position. I don't expect him to be running it down. I also don't expect him to be hard carrying against better teams. In D tier, first up I have Slater, who is Gam's new ADC after they dropped Style. I want to make this clear, I think that Slater and Palette are a massive upgrade to what we had at MSI with Style. In my opinion, Style was that one big weak point that was able to be focused down and exploited. And Slater and Palette, they were on the second place team, SBTC. And of course, I think it was very clear to everybody also in spring that Slater and Palette were just the better duo. That being said, Slater is not Artemis, and he's not Shogun. I don't necessarily think if you put Slater in the LEC or the LCS that he'd be able to make it. Yan is an ADC who I think is decent, but really just doesn't hold up to the other international ADCs in this competition. In my opinion, he barely holds his own on TL. I think he's fine in the LCS as a bottom half ADC, but when you stack him up against the best ADCs from minor regions, I don't think he's going to be able to stand out. Seo's in a similar position to Yan where, you know, I think he's okay. He can hold up in his region, and he's also young. At MSI, he showed tremendous growth. At the beginning, he was pretty much just running it down, but by the end of MSI, he looked solid. He was gapping Style. That being said, Style is also an ADC who I would probably put in D tier, so that's not really necessarily saying much. I don't think he's going to beat any of the other LCS or LEC or top major region ADCs. Then in F tier, I kind of have Milan, and this is nothing against Milan. I don't necessarily think he's a dirty inter or anything. I just think he's not ready yet. He had to come in because of the situation with Tol2 and Udapon moving into top lane. And you know, he is what it says he is. He's an academy player. He needs more years, he needs more experience, and you can tell that when he goes up against the top LJL teams that he's not quite there. He doesn't quite know what he's doing. And I think he's going to have a really, really tough time against these other ADCs. Then finally, we get to move on to the supports. For me, I've got On as Soul S tier. It's the perfect meta for him. Any meta where you have hook champions and engage champions, On is going to be a beast. He's one of those players where if you put him on Lulu, he'll find a way to flash R knock up into 4 people. He's one of those players. And so now that you see Alistar coming back into the meta specifically, this guy is kind of a monster. He also complements Elk's playstyle perfectly. Both of them are complete psychopaths who will just go in given any opportunity. Then moving into A tier, I have Missing up first. Missing has been one of those players who's just been insane from support for years now. I do think the meta swapping from Enchanter to Engage hurt Missing a little bit, but not enough that it's taking him out of that top tier support level. Lehens is here because he's the best support in LCK. He's got a champion Ocean, he performs in almost every single game. I just don't think he has that same 1v9 super carry potential that On has. Then I've got a Western player slipping in here. I've got Mickey. Look, Mickey's been crazy for years. Same thing as Lehens, he has a massive champion pool. Same thing as On, he's one of those players who, given any sort of opportunity, will instantly jump to make the play happen. Totally has 1v9 carry potential. I honestly see no reason why you wouldn't have Mickey in the same tier as the Eastern supports. Then you have Delight, who's been pretty sleeper in the LCK for a while now. When he was on Fred at Brion, I think people could tell that he was the star player of that team who was getting elo held. And now that he's on Gen G, he's proven it. Finds really good engages consistently in most of his games. Many people think that he's the best Rakan player in LCK, and Rakan is definitely at the top of the meta. Very solid support all around. Hong is the same kind of deal. He's been very, very good for a very, very long time in LPL, and I'm glad that he's finally on a team that can make it to Worlds instead of being elo held on FPX. Then you have Keria, where last year at Worlds, a lot of people would have said that he's the S tier support, and maybe even the best player in the world. But he did suffer from the Faker syndrome, where Faker went out, and most of T1 looked like they had gotten their heads cut off. We're also stuck in a meta where a lot of supports are playing engaged champions again, which is definitely not Keria's strong suit. Keria was at the top when he had a lot of freedom with what he could pick. Here we've got the B tier supports, and these are the ones who I think are capable of making game-winning plays or finding creative engages. Kellen probably would have been closer to the back of B tier. He even got subbed out for Bible, but honestly, ever since he got subbed out for Bible, he's come back in, and he's looked a lot better. If he can show his playoffs form for all of Worlds, he's bottom of A tier for sure. He doesn't belong in B tier, but he hasn't proven he's had that consistency yet, and he's definitely a B tier level support if you're taking a look at the entire year. Then we've got Trimby, who also did not have a very good start to the year, but had a great finish. Ever since he got on Fnatic with Noah, he's gone back to being the same beast that he was on Rogue. He kind of reminds me a little bit on engaged champions like a budget On, and on enchanters and creative picks like a budget Keria, if that makes sense. You can always expect him to be super creative. Then I've got Lebrov, and I swear I was not the person who made this tier list. This is just one that I pulled off that was already on Tier Maker. I know that Lebrov is super short IRL. I was not the one who made his portrait significantly shorter than everybody else. Anyway, Lebrov I have here mainly because, in solo queue at least, he is the best support in Europe. Period. Has he shown that level of support play in LEC yet? No. But does he have the potential to at any given moment? Probably, yeah. I'm gonna give him benefit of the doubt and say that he'll be able to step it up against better teams. Of my placements on these tier lists so far, this one might be the most out of pocket. I have Palette here in B tier from Gam, and you'll just have to trust me on this. Palette is very, very good. You can kind of tell when you're watching the games. Like, some of the problems that I have with other minor region supports is that you'll see them make big engages or big hooks, but a lot of times you can pin those down to, well, the players that they're playing against aren't as good and they kind of walked into the hook, or they could have flashed out of the hook and they didn't. But when you watch Pallet play, the angles that he goes for are angles that I feel like would work universally against any team. There's no reason why Pallet should be in a minor region, honestly. I think he can move up to a major region at any point and play fine against anyone. Hylissang, of course, he's a legend. He has a super high ceiling. At any given moment, he can make the game-winning play before the other team even knows what happens. However, he can also run it down whenever. He's been doing that a little bit less this year, but he's not on the same level that he was on in, let's say, Fnatic Worlds 2020. Crisp is another support who I think has been suffering a little bit from the meta. He looked really good in 2019. He looked really good in 2021, but this year just has not been his year yet. On a dime, he could turn it around and be one of the best supports in the world, but based on what we've seen in 2023 so far, I don't think that's going to happen. Next, we've got Seos, and I think very similarly to Pallet, there's no reason for this guy to be in a minor region unless he wants to be. You could put him in any LEC or LCS team and he would play just fine and probably stand out too. He's another one of those players who has a really good eye for which engages will work and when he can take them. And I would say that a lot of Loud's early aggression and mid-game aggression that they're known for actually comes from Seos. Huhi I put here begrudgingly in B tier. People who have been on this channel for a while know that I am not a Huhi fan, but I do have to admit that he is really good at engaging, and we are in fact in an engaged support meta. Huhi is right at home this tournament, and I think that he's another one of those players who can make game-winning plays now. Then in the C tier, we have the 3 LCS supports. Sven I think has potential, but I also think that this meta is not suited for him. He felt a lot more at home in the Enchanter meta in my opinion. Then for Core and Ignar, I feel like for both of them, their best days are behind them. Core has been noticeably more inconsistent ever since 2021, and Ignar hasn't even consistently been on a team, so it's hard to say how good he is. I don't really see any of these 3 making headlines at Worlds. Then again, I have no F tier supports because I don't necessarily think that any of these supports are inters. But here in D tier, I have the ones that just really don't impress me, and I don't think will be able to make a stand or do anything impressive. First up, I have Harp, who in the LJL, yes, he is very threatening with Blitzcrank, but this is kind of like what I was talking about with Pallet, where a lot of times when I watch Harp play Blitzcrank, it seems more like it's because the enemy can be exploited by it, and less so because Harp is a Blitzcrank god. Woody I have here because he was mainly silent during MSI when he was playing against DFM and Loud. Domestically he's fine, but internationally he's nothing special. BA, same thing, he's been domestically very strong, but internationally didn't really show up in the times that he's been. And well, you know, for Team Wales, if nothing else though, I really hope that it's BA who plays because they have another support named CBL who played some of their playoff games, and let me tell you, CBL is an inter. If CBL was playing, I would have him as F tier. Xiaoxi is here because, again, he's one of those players that I just don't think will accomplish anything. He was on a bottom tier Ultra Prime team, and then he got moved down to PCS where he looked okay. Then Lions, who I also think is another one of those players who won't be running it down, can hold up domestically, but can't hold a candle to the top supports. Alright, and that's actually going to do it for players. I also plan to do a video on team rankings, but I did want to show my player rankings first, because I have some interesting graphics that compare where I put the players compared to where I put my teams. So I want to do one big video kind of talking about the overall placements of players on teams and how that impacted my team breakdown. That'll be in a separate video. That'll also come out before World starts. But that's going to be it for this one. Thank you for watching. If you think my rankings are wrong and you want to discuss why, then you can feel free to drop a YouTube comment, or you can join my Discord server. The link to that is in the description. If you join the Discord server and are respectful about your opinions, I will happily talk to anyone about what they think about players. I like having these discussions and I like talking about players. In fact, this is the first time that I've ever done a dedicated video for player rankings. So let me know how you guys think it went and if you want me to do it again for future international tournaments. With that, I'll be off. Bye.